He called me Mom for 30 years. 30 years of scraped knees, bedtime stories, birthday cakes I baked from scratch, and a love I poured out, as if he were my own flesh and blood, from the moment his father, my dear Arthur, brought him into my life as a bewildered 5-year-old. Then Arthur passed, God rest his soul, the bank account settled, the inheritance transferred, and suddenly, I wasn't Mom anymore. Not really. I was just Eleanor, the old woman who had once been married to his father. The old woman living in a corner of their grand new life, a life built, in part, with the remnants of mine. A nuisance, it turned out, to be managed, and eventually, discarded. I'll tell you, I never thought I'd see the day when the boy I raised, the boy whose tears I'd dried more times than I could count, would look right through me, his eyes as cold as a stranger's, or worse, filled with a kind of weary impatience. But he did. And what happened after that, well, that's a story of how a forgotten woman, stripped of nearly everything she held dear, found her voice, and her strength, in the last place she expected, amidst the ashes of her old life. It's a long story, a painful one in parts, but I believe it's worth telling. Stick around till the end to hear how it all unfolded. And please tell me, where in the world are you watching from today? I'd love to know. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this, because what I learned is something every one of us needs to remember. Our worth isn't determined by those who choose to devalue us. My life with Arthur had been a quiet joy. We met later in life. I was nearly 30, and he a widower in his late 30s with a young son, Michael. Michael's own mother had left when he was just a toddler, a flighty woman, Arthur had said with a sigh, who couldn't handle responsibility. I stepped into a ready-made family, and I did so with an open heart. Michael was a solemn child at first, watchful. I didn't push. I baked his favorite cookies, read him adventure stories, listened to his day. Slowly, very slowly, he thawed. The first time he hesitantly called me Mom, my heart swelled to bursting. It wasn't a title I demanded, but one I cherished more than any other. Arthur and I, we never had children of our own. Michael became the center of my maternal world. I remember his school plays, bursting with pride even when he was just the third tree from the left. I recall the agonizing wait outside emergency rooms for stitches from boyhood tumbles, the late-night talks about bullies, about girls, about his dreams for the future. I put my own small ambitions aside, the little catering business I'd dreamed of, because being a mother, being Arthur's wife, that was my everything. We weren't wealthy, not then. My own modest inheritance from my parents went into helping with Michael's college fees, a fact Arthur meticulously noted in his ledgers, though I never thought twice about it. It was for Michael. For our son. When Michael met Sarah, he was in his late 20s, just starting to make his way. Sarah was polished, ambitious. She had a way of looking at our comfortable, slightly worn home, as if it were a temporary inconvenience. I tried to like her, for Michael's sake. I hosted dinners, complimented her style, listened to her plans for Michael's career. Arthur was more reserved. He'd watch her sometimes, a thoughtful, almost troubled expression on his face, but he never said much, not wanting to interfere. Then, Arthur's health began to fail. It was quick, cruel. Lung cancer. Those last months were a blow of hospital visits, whispered consultations, and a desperate clinging to hope. Michael was there, of course, but often it was Sarah who did the talking, efficient and cool, managing schedules, discussing prognoses with a detachment that chilled me even then. When Arthur passed, the world tilted on its axis. The silence in the house was a physical weight. Michael inherited a substantial sum from Arthur investments his father had shrewdly managed over the decades, a legacy meant to secure his future. It was a considerable amount, more than any of us had ever imagined. For a few months after the funeral, things seemed normal, if grief-stricken normal can exist. Michael and Sarah were kind, solicitous. "You mustn't be alone, Mom," Michael said, his arm around my shoulder. "We want you with us." Sarah nodded, a practiced smile on her face. "We are going to buy a new house, a bigger place. There'll be plenty of room for you. It's what Dad would have wanted." It sounded wonderful, a balm to my raw grief. The thought of rattling around our old house, filled with Arthur's absence, was unbearable. So, I agreed. I sold our home, the place where I'd built my life with Arthur, where Michael had grown up. It fetched a decent price, every penny of which I entrusted to Michael and Sarah. "For the new house," I said. "Consider it my contribution, an investment in our future together." Michael hugged me tightly. "Oh, Mom, you're the best," Sarah beamed. "This will help so much, Eleanor. We'll make sure it's a wonderful home for all of us." I believed them. Why wouldn't I? This was Michael, my son. The new house was enormous. Gleaming, modern, impersonal. My suite, as Sarah called it, was a bedroom and small bathroom at the back, overlooking the bins. It was tastefully decorated, but it didn't feel like home. The first sign that things were amiss was subtle. My things, the precious mementos from my life with Arthur, were mostly kept in boxes in the garage. "We need to keep the main areas clear, Eleanor, for entertaining," Sarah would say, her voice sweet but firm. My investment, from the sale of my house, was never mentioned again, absorbed into the vastness of their new lifestyle. Dinners became less frequent. Michael was always busy with work, and Sarah often had engagements. I found myself eating alone more often than not, in my little room. The word Mom started to sound, strained from Michael's lips, usually when he wanted something, a button sewn, a recipe of Arthur's. From Sarah, it was always Eleanor, cool and distant. The true betrayal, the one that shattered the last vestiges of my naivety, came about a year after I moved in. I remember it was a Tuesday. I'd made a pot roast, Arthur's favorite, hoping for a family meal. Michael came home late. Sarah drifted in even later, phone pressed to her ear. They ate quickly, barely speaking to me. Then, as I was clearing the plates, Michael cleared his throat. "Mom," he began, then faltered, looking at Sarah. She gave him a sharp little nod. "Eleanor," Sarah said, taking over, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Michael and I have been talking. We feel it's time for you to have a place with more specialized care. People your own age. We've found a very nice facility." I stared at them, the plate clattering from my hand. "A facility? What are you talking about?" Michael wouldn't meet my eyes. "It's for the best, Mom. You need more than we can give you here. You're getting older." I was 61. 61. Not ancient, not infirm. Just in the way. "My money," I whispered, thinking of the sale of my home. "What about my contribution?" Sarah waved a dismissive hand. "Oh, that was absorbed into the household expenses long ago, Eleanor. Goodness, your upkeep isn't cheap upkeep." Like I was a piece of inconvenient furniture. The cruelty of it stole my breath. Michael finally looked at me, a flicker of something shame in his eyes before it was extinguished. "Sarah's right. It's all arranged. You'll move next week," and just like that, my life was dismantled. The boy I raised, the man whose hand I held, was casting me out. The word Mom died on his lips that night, and in my heart, a different, colder understanding began to dawn. The inheritance was long gone into their lifestyle, and my usefulness, along with my own money, had apparently expired. The facility, as they called it, was a grim, faded building on the outskirts of town, smelling faintly of disinfectant and despair. My room was small, linoleum-floored, with a narrow bed and a view of a brick wall. The contrast to Michael and Sarah's opulent house, the house my money had helped secure, was a constant, bitter ache. I had a few suitcases of clothes, a small box of photographs, and Arthur's old reading glasses. The rest of my life, my memories, were deemed surplus to requirements. Days bled into one another, a monotonous cycle of bland meals in a noisy dining hall, hours spent staring out of the window, or at the flickering television in the common room. Loneliness became my closest companion, a heavy cloak I couldn't shed. I felt invisible, erased. The other residents were mostly much older, many lost in the fog of dementia. There was no companionship here, only a shared sense of waiting for the end. My heart, which I thought had broken the night Michael and Sarah announced my exile, found new ways to fracture every single day. I replayed my life endlessly in my mind, searching for clues, for the moment it all went wrong. Had I been blind? Had Arthur seen something in Sarah, in Michael even, that I had missed? His quiet, thoughtful gaze upon Sarah, was that disapproval? Concern? I remembered his meticulous nature, how he'd always insisted on keeping records, making notes. "You never know, Ellie," he'd say, "when a bit of order will save the day." I'd smiled then, thinking it a harmless quirk. Now, his words echoed with a poignancy that made me weep. My sacrifices for Michael, big and small, paraded before my mind's eye. The university fund, the down payment on his first car, the endless emotional support. Had it all been for nothing? Was love so easily discarded when it became inconvenient? The pain of his betrayal was a physical thing, a constant pressure in my chest. He was living a life of luxury, a life I had, in my own small way, helped to build, while I was relegated to this waiting room for death. The shame of it was also profound. Shame that I had been so foolish, so trusting. Shame that I had allowed myself to be so completely devalued. I tried to reach out once. Just once. After a particularly bleak week, I gathered my courage and used the payphone in the hall. My mobile phone had been a casualty of the move. Sarah had forgotten to continue the plan. I dialed Michael's number, my hand trembling. Sarah answered. Her voice was like ice. "Eleanor." "What is it?" "Sarah, please, may I speak to Michael?" "He's busy," she snapped. "We are very busy, Eleanor. What could you possibly need?" I wanted to talk to him." A sigh, heavy with exasperation. "Look, we've done all we can for you. You're safe, you're fed. Many people your age would be grateful for such arrangements. You really need to stop dwelling on the past and make the best of things." Grateful. The word struck me like a blow. "But Sarah, the house, my money." "Oh, for heaven's sake, Eleanor, are you still on about that? That money was a gift. A contribution. It's gone. Spent. You need to accept that. Michael is moving on with his life, and frankly, so should you. Don't call here again unless it's a genuine emergency." The line went dead. I stood there, receiver in my hand, the dial tone buzzing in my ear like a cruel insect. A gift? That's what she called the proceeds of my entire married life, the sum total of my security. It was then, I think, that the last flicker of hope for reconciliation died. There was no misunderstanding. There was only callousness and greed. Rock bottom arrived on a grey November afternoon. It would have been Arthur's birthday. I remembered all the little celebrations we'd had, the slightly lopsided cakes I'd bake, his delighted smile. Now, there was nothing. Just the drone of the television in the common room, and the smell of overcooked cabbage from the kitchen. I saw a discarded newspaper, and on the society page, a small picture, Michael and Sarah, smiling, at some charity gala. Sarah was dripping in jewels, Michael looked prosperous and blandly handsome beside her. The caption mentioned their generous donation, my money, I thought with a fresh wave of nausea. My home, my security, funding their philanthropic posturing. I felt a desolation so profound it was almost a physical collapse. I didn't go down for dinner that evening. I lay on my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of every mistake, every misplaced trust, every sacrifice that had been thrown back in my face. What was the point of me anymore? I was nothing. A ghost in my own life. That night, I truly believed there was no way out, no way back. I was utterly and completely alone, defeated. It was a few weeks later, during a routine clear-out of the meager possessions I'd been allowed to bring to the facility, that the first glimmer appeared. The staff had asked us to consolidate our belongings, as storage space was limited. I had one cardboard box, mostly filled with old photo albums and a few of Arthur's books. At the very bottom, under a stack of yellowed linen, was a battered old attaché case of his. I hadn't even remembered packing it. It must have been scooped up with other sentimental items. I'd assumed it was empty, or held papers of no consequence. With nothing else to do, I fiddled with the rusty clasps. They sprang open. Inside, nestled amongst old tax returns and expired warranties, was a slim, leather-bound journal and a thick manila envelope. My heart gave a strange little flutter. Arthur's neat, precise handwriting was on the envelope's label, "For Eleanor, personal and confidential." My fingers trembled as I opened it. Inside the envelope were copies of documents I vaguely remembered signing years ago, letters, and a series of meticulously kept notes in Arthur's hand. There was a copy of the bill of sale for my old house. And stapled to it, a promissory note, typed, with Michael's signature at the bottom, and mine as a witness, for the exact amount of the sale, designated as a personal loan for property acquisition, repayable upon demand or from estate. I remembered signing something when I gave them the money, something Sarah had brushed off as just a formality. For the bank, I hadn't read it properly, trusting them implicitly. Arthur, it seemed, had not. He had insisted on this document. There were also bank statements showing the transfer of funds from my account to Michael's, with memo lines Arthur had carefully added, loan for new property, and then, the journal. It wasn't a diary of daily events, but more of a ledger of thoughts and observations, particularly from his later years. He wrote about his pride in Michael, but also, with increasing frequency, his concerns about Sarah's influence, her materialism, Michael's apparent weakness in her hands. He wrote, "I fear Michael mistakes extravagance for success, and Sarah encourages this folly. Ellie has given so much. I must ensure her kindness is not her ruin," and on the last page, dated only weeks before his final illness took hold, "have made provisions. Ellie must be protected. The house money is a loan, clearly documented. Other investments secured for her separately. She will need to be strong. Hope she finds this if needed." A wave of emotion washed over me, grief, love, and then, a slow, rising tide of something else. Anger, yes, but a focused anger, a righteous anger. Arthur had seen. He had known, on some level, what they might be capable of. He had tried to protect me, even from beyond the grave. The despair that had clung to me like a shroud began to recede, replaced by a flicker of resolve. This wasn't just about money anymore. It was about Arthur's memory, his foresight. It was about the truth. He had left me a lifeline. I will not let him down, I thought. I will not let them erase me. The feeling was foreign, almost frightening after months of passivity, but it was also undeniably empowering. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I saw a path, however faint, through the darkness. The first seed of a plan began to germinate. I couldn't do this alone. These papers were complex, and Michael and Sarah were formidable in their arrogance. I needed help, professional help. But how? I had no money for lawyers. My tiny pension barely covered the incidentals at this place. I thought of the few people I interacted with. There was a kindly volunteer, Mrs. Peterson, who came twice a week to read to some of the residents. She was a retired woman, sensible, with sharp eyes. Perhaps she would know someone, or have some advice. I clutched Arthur's papers to my chest. It was a fragile hope, but it was hope nonetheless. I would be cautious. I would be smart. Arthur had given me the tools, now I had to learn how to use them. The next time Mrs. Peterson visited, I waited until she was finished reading and asked if I could have a private word. We sat in a quiet corner of the sunroom, the winter light pale and thin through the grimy windows. I hesitated, then, taking a deep breath, I told her a condensed version of my story, my voice trembling at first, then gaining strength as I laid out the facts of Michael and Sarah's betrayal. I showed her copies of the promissory note and Arthur's handwritten observations. She listened patiently, her expression growing more serious with every word. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her gaze thoughtful. I had expected perhaps sympathy, maybe a suggestion to contact social services. What she said next surprised me. "Eleanor," she said, her voice firm, "what your stepson and his wife have done is not just morally reprehensible, it may very well be illegal. Arthur was a clever man to document that loan so clearly. It turned out Mrs. Peterson Beatrice, she insisted I call, had worked as a legal secretary for over 40 years before retiring. She knew her way around documents. This promissory note," she said, tapping it with her finger, "is a binding contract. Their failure to repay you upon demand is a breach of that contract." She told me about a pro bono legal clinic run by a group of retired lawyers, and even offered to help me draft an initial letter and make some calls. Beatrice became my first ally, a beacon of practical kindness in a world that had shown me so little. With Beatrice's help, I contacted the legal clinic. After reviewing Arthur's documents, they referred me to a lawyer, Mr. Alastair Finch, who specialized in elder financial abuse and estate disputes. He wasn't retired, he was a sharp, compassionate man in his late 40s who listened to my full story with quiet intensity. When I laid out Arthur's papers, his eyes lit up with a professional gleam. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his tone respectful, "your late husband was extraordinarily prescient. These documents are remarkably thorough. The loan agreement is ironclad. The supporting evidence of your financial contributions to your stepson over the years, meticulously recorded by Mr. Vance, paints a very clear picture." We discussed strategy. Mr. Finch advised against any direct contact from me to Michael or Sarah. "Let them underestimate you," he said. "We will proceed formally. First, a letter of demand for the full repayment of the loan, plus accrued interest as stipulated in the note. Given the amount, it's unlikely they can pay it immediately without liquidating assets." He meant the house. Their grand house, bought with my money. The plan was simple, direct, and entirely legal. There would be no emotional appeals, no begging. Just the cold, hard facts of contract law. Arthur's quiet diligence was about to speak very loudly indeed. A subtle transformation began within me. The constant ache of despair started to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. I began to take better care of myself. I joined the gentle exercise class at the facility, forced myself to eat properly in the dining hall, even engaged in small conversations with other residents. The fog of worthlessness lifted, piece by piece. I reread Arthur's journal often, drawing strength from his words, his unwavering belief in me. His love felt like a shield. I stopped feeling like a victim. I was Eleanor Vance, Arthur's widow, and I was fighting for what was rightfully mine, for the dignity they had tried to strip from me. I found myself standing taller, my voice a little firmer. Beatrice noticed. "You look different, Eleanor," she said one afternoon, a smile in her eyes. "There's a spark back," and there was. It was the spark of righteous anger, yes, but also the spark of self-respect being slowly, carefully rekindled. I was no longer just waiting. I was preparing. The first strategic action was deceptively quiet. Mr. Finch drafted the letter of demand. It was a masterpiece of legal precision, polite yet unyielding, detailing the loan, the amount due, and the deadline for repayment. It was sent via registered mail, requiring a signature. I imagined Sarah's perfectly manicured hand signing for it, perhaps with a flicker of irritation at the interruption, little knowing the contents. Then, we waited. Mr. Finch had explained that this was just the first step. If they ignored it or refused to pay, we would proceed with legal action to enforce the debt, which could ultimately involve placing a lien on their property. The house. Their opulent cage built on deceit. The thought of them receiving that letter, the shock, the dawning realization that I was not the defeated old woman they had dismissed, brought a grim sort of satisfaction. It wasn't about revenge, it was about consequences. Arthur's foresight, his meticulous care, was about to ensure they faced them. I felt a sense of him with me, a guiding hand, and it made me feel incredibly strong. The silence from Michael and Sarah lasted exactly 4 days after the registered letter was signed for. On the 5th day, my old, rarely used pay-as-you-go mobile phone, which Beatrice had helped me reactivate with a few dollars, buzzed. It was Michael. His voice, when I answered, was a mixture of disbelief and forced bonhomie. "Mom? It's Michael. Listen, we got this very strange letter from some lawyer. It's obviously a misunderstanding. About that money for the house, that was a gift, remember?" I took a breath, picturing Mr. Finch's calm demeanor, Beatrice's encouraging nod. "No, Michael," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "It was a loan. I have the promissory note you signed. Your father made sure of it." There was a pause. I could hear Sarah muttering angrily in the background. "Now, Mom, let's not be hasty," Michael continued, his tone becoming a little strained. "There's no need for lawyers. Why don't I come over and we can talk about this, sort it out?" "There's nothing to sort out, Michael," I replied, quoting Mr. Finch. "The terms are quite clear. My lawyer, Mr. Finch, will handle all further communication." I could almost hear Sarah snatch the phone. "Eleanor, what is the meaning of this?" Her voice was sharp, laced with fury. "After everything we've done for you. Taking you in. This is how you repay us. With threats." "It's not a threat, Sarah," I said, a surprising calm settling over me. "It's a statement of fact. A debt is owed." I then ended the call, my heart pounding, but a sense of triumph blooming within me. The first crack had appeared in their arrogant facade. They were rattled. They had underestimated Arthur, and they had most certainly underestimated me. The pressure was beginning to build, just as Mr. Finch had predicted. The confrontation, when it came, was not a shouting match, but a meticulously orchestrated meeting in Mr. Finch's sober, book-lined office. Michael and Sarah arrived with their own lawyer, a slick, aggressive man who immediately tried to dismiss Arthur's documents as the sentimental scribblings of an elderly man, and a loan made under duress by a grieving widow. Mr. Finch, calm and unflappable, simply laid out the evidence: the signed promissory note, the bank transfer records with Arthur's clear annotations, copies of Arthur's journal entries expressing his intentions, and even estimates of the value my gifted money had added to their property. I sat beside Mr. Finch, saying very little, observing. Sarah was dressed impeccably, but there were tight lines of strain around her mouth. She kept whispering furiously to her lawyer. Michael looked pale and uncomfortable, avoiding my gaze entirely. He looked diminished, smaller than I remembered. The bravado he'd shown when casting me out was entirely gone. My composure seemed to unnerve them more than any outburst would have. I was no longer the weeping, broken woman they had dismissed. I was calm, resolute, dressed in a simple but neat dress Beatrice had helped me find at a charity shop. When their lawyer tried to suggest I was being manipulated, I looked him squarely in the eye and said, my late husband was a man of great integrity and foresight. These were his wishes, and his safeguards for me. I am merely seeing them honored. Mr. Finch then presented the current valuation of their house and the outstanding loan amount, which, with accrued interest, was substantial. He outlined our intention to secure a judgment and place a lien on the property if the debt was not settled promptly. Their lawyer blustered about family matters and ungrateful parents, but Mr. Finch coolly steered the conversation back to the contractual obligation. Sarah's face was a mask of fury. You can't do this, she hissed at me across the table. That house is ours. Actually, Sarah, I said, my voice quiet but firm, a significant portion of its value was built upon money loaned by me, money from the sale of the home I shared with Arthur. The documents are quite clear. The full realization dawned on them slowly, etched in the growing panic in Michael's eyes and the tightening of Sarah's jaw. Their lawyer, after a whispered conference with them, began to change his tune. He started talking about payment plans, about coming to an arrangement. It was clear they didn't have the liquid cash to repay the loan. Their lavish lifestyle, the expensive cars, the designer clothes, the charity galas, it was all built on a foundation of debt and my misappropriated funds. They had lived far beyond their means, assuming my money was a permanent, interest-free subsidy. Mr. Finch politely but firmly rejected the idea of a protracted payment plan. Mrs. Vance is entitled to the full amount owed, as per the agreement, he stated. We understand this may necessitate the sale of certain assets. The implication was crystal clear: sell the house. Their palace, their status symbol. The shift in power was palpable. They had walked in expecting to intimidate me, to make this go away. They were leaving with the knowledge that their carefully constructed world was about to crumble. Sarah looked as though she might explode, but her lawyer placed a restraining hand on her arm. Michael just stared at the polished mahogany table, his shoulders slumped. He looked up once, a desperate, pleading look towards me, the ghost of the boy I once knew. But the man he had become, the man who had stood by while his wife orchestrated my eviction and financial ruin, deserved no such leniency. I met his gaze, my expression unwavering, perhaps a touch of sadness there for what was lost, but no weakness. Mr. Finch concluded the meeting by stating we expected a concrete proposal for repayment within 7 days, failing which we would initiate court proceedings. As they left, Sarah shot me a look of pure venom. Michael stumbled slightly, looking utterly defeated. I felt a complex mix of emotions, vindication, certainly, but also a profound weariness, and a quiet sorrow for the son I had loved, the son who had chosen this path. But above it all, there was a sense of quiet strength. I had faced them, and I had not broken. Arthur's love and foresight had armed me, and I had finally found the courage to wield those weapons. The downfall of Michael and Sarah was swift and, from what I heard through Mr. Finch, rather messy. Faced with imminent legal action and the undeniable proof of their debt, they had no choice but to sell the grand house. It sold quickly, but in a market that had cooled slightly, and after commissions and their own outstanding mortgage on the property, they hadn't even owned it outright. The amount left to repay me was significant enough to leave them with very little. They were forced to move into a small, rented apartment in a far less fashionable part of town. The expensive cars were repossessed. Sarah's social standing, built on a facade of wealth, evaporated overnight. Whispers followed them, I was told. Beatrice, who had a surprising network of acquaintances, heard that Sarah was incandescent with rage, blaming Michael for everything, for being weak, for not handling me better. Their marriage, already strained by their financial recklessness, began to publicly unravel. Michael, stripped of his inherited wealth and the status it provided, had to find actual employment, something for which his previous life had ill-prepared him. The generous donors were now just another struggling couple, their fall from grace a quiet topic of conversation in the circles they once frequented. A few weeks after they had moved out of the house, Michael called me again. This time, there was no bravado, no bluster. Just a tired, broken voice. "Mom," he said, the word hesitant, almost a question. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong. Sarah, well, it doesn't matter. I messed up. I know that now." He sounded genuinely contrite, or perhaps just thoroughly defeated. I listened quietly. Part of me, the part that still remembered the little boy with scraped knees, felt a pang of something akin to pity. But the woman who had sat in that bleak room at the facility, discarded and forgotten, was more cautious. "I hear your apology, Michael," I said, my voice even. "And I appreciate it. But words are easy. Actions have consequences. You made choices that caused a great deal of pain." I know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Is there any way I can make it up to you? Can we ever go back?" "Go back to what, Michael?" I asked gently. "To a time before you chose Sarah's ambition over your father's memory, and my well-being." "No, we can't go back. The trust was broken too profoundly for that." I told him that perhaps, in time, if he truly worked to rebuild his life on a foundation of honesty and integrity, if he demonstrated real change, we might find a new, different kind of relationship. But not now. And not with Sarah. I wished him well in finding his own way. It was the best I could offer. Forgiveness is a complex journey, and I wasn't ready to offer absolution for betrayals so deep. He needed to find his own redemption, not seek it from me. With the proceeds from the enforced repayment of the loan, Mr. Finch helped me secure a lovely, light-filled apartment in a quiet, well-maintained building for seniors, a world away from the grim facility I'd been consigned to. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I had a small balcony where I could grow herbs, a comfortable chair for reading, and space for Arthur's books and my cherished photographs. The healing was a slow process. There were days when the grief for the son I thought I had, for the wasted years of unquestioning love, would wash over me. But now, it was mingled with a sense of profound gratitude for Arthur's incredible foresight, for Beatrice's unexpected friendship, for Mr. Finch's professional guidance, and, surprisingly, for my own resilience. I had faced the worst, and I had survived. More than survived, I had reclaimed myself. I learned to manage my finances with care, taking an active interest in the investments Arthur had so wisely set aside for me, the ones Michael and Sarah had never known about. I found a quiet joy in my independence, in making my own decisions, in the simple rhythm of my new life. I reconnected with Beatrice, of course. Our friendship, forged in adversity, became a source of great comfort and joy. We'd meet for tea, visit museums, or simply enjoy companionable silence. Through her, I met other women with their own stories of resilience, and I began to feel part of a community again. I started volunteering at a local library, reading to children, something I hadn't done since Michael was small. It brought back sweet memories, but without the sting of betrayal now. It was just a gentle echo of a past love, repurposed for a new generation. I even took a small cooking class, finally exploring that long-ago dream of a catering business, not for profit, but for the simple pleasure of creating and sharing. My life was smaller, in some ways, than the one I had envisioned with Michael and Sarah, but it was infinitely richer, more authentic. It was mine. My new life settled into a peaceful rhythm. I had my sunny apartment, my books, my small circle of true friends. I had enough to live comfortably, and more importantly, I had my dignity and my peace of mind. The shadows of Michael and Sarah's betrayal still flickered occasionally, but they no longer had the power to consume me. They were a part of my story, a painful chapter, but not the ending. The ending was mine to write. I found that the independence I now cherished was far more valuable than the illusion of family I had clung to for so long. I learned that true strength isn't about avoiding pain, but about walking through it and emerging whole, if scarred, on the other side. Sometimes, I would use a little of the money Arthur had left, the money carefully shielded from grasping hands, to do small, anonymous kindnesses. A donation to the legal aid clinic that had helped me, a gift card tucked into the collection box at a women's shelter, a larger-than-necessary tip for a struggling young waitress. It wasn't about grand gestures, but about putting a little bit of good back into a world that had, for a time, seemed so dark. Arthur, I knew, would have approved. He had always been a quiet philanthropist in his own way. His true legacy wasn't just the money he left, but the lessons of integrity and care he had instilled, lessons that had ultimately saved me. Looking back, the journey was incredibly arduous. To be called Mom with such affection for so many years, only to have that affection revealed as a conditional commodity, a performance tied to an expected inheritance, and my own utility, was a wound that cut deeper than I could ever have imagined. But from that wound, something new grew. A strength I didn't know I possessed. A clarity about what truly matters in life, not possessions, not grand houses, but integrity, kindness, and the unwavering love of those who cherish you for who you are, not for what you can provide. The pain taught me to value myself, to set boundaries, to understand that my worth was inherent, not something to be bestowed or withdrawn by others. He called me Mom when it suited him. Now, I call myself strong, I call myself free, I call myself Eleanor, a woman who found her voice in the silence, and her power in the quiet unfolding of truth. And that, dear listener, is how I found my way back to myself, not by seeking revenge, but by seeking justice, and in doing so, found a peace I never thought possible. It wasn't the life I had planned, but it was a good life, a true life, built on the firm foundation of self-respect. Thanks for listening to my story. Don't forget to subscribe if this story found you and resonated with you. Please, feel free to share your own experiences or thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, your voice matters, and sometimes, sharing it is the first step towards reclaiming it.